Thanks, Rick. Thank you to Ken Weigel. Thank you to all the folks that have worked so hard to make our gathering together possible. I'm just really grateful to be here. I've said, as I begin, I'll tell us a little bit about how we're seeing the next couple of hours going in just a moment. But before I do that, I just want to acknowledge a couple things about who I am and who we are together here in the room. The first thing that I let people know that my wife of 36 years is a licensed clinical social worker, and as I say, most of her professional work has been done in our kitchen. And that's because she's married to a professional sinner. I'm not an amateur. I'm just really good at it. I figure if you've been doing something for a long time and you're really effective at it. So this is, that's one thing that I would say. And part of that also includes the fact that as I share things with us today, know that I'm talking about things that I myself am working on. I myself am really imperfect at the things that we're going to talk about. And so I covet your prayers as well, as I will be in prayer for you as we like to say, as we'll talk about at the end of our time, what we're doing is we're practicing for heaven. This is what we're doing. To live on this earth is that we're practicing for the heaven that is coming in its fullness, that has already started, but that is coming in its fullness. And it is a thing that is awesome to behold, and the question is, will I be able to tolerate it when it arrives? And will I be willing enough to be loved enough? Will I be willing to allow Jesus to love me enough that will get me ready for his appearance? So that's one thing to say. And then I'm grateful for those. How many here are pastors? If you raise, so a fair number of folks who are pastors here. And so for the men and women who are here who are pastors, I want to say this. I don't believe anyone has a harder job on the face of the earth than pastors. And as a psychiatrist, and I work in Washington, D.C., which of course means I'll never be out of a job, right? And as some have said, right, and you clearly haven't done your job well enough yet, so could you please do some work on that? I have the privilege of seeing lots of people walk through my door over the last 30 years. And when a pastor sits in my office, one of the common threads that we see, and one of the questions that I will ask every pastor is, whose job is it to take care of you? And I have yet to have a single one give me the names of the people whose job it is to take care of them. Oh, they'll say things like, oh, it's my elder's job. And then I say, well, how do they take care of you? And their answers are tepid at best. Not because they don't want them to be cared for by others. It's just not part of the structure. And so pastors are asked to represent God to the people and the people to God. And most pastors that I know, it's kind of like marriage. You think you know what you're getting into until you get into it, just a few hours after the rings are on. And so my longing for us today, when we come to these kinds of gatherings, many of us I would come here because I can leave my real life behind. Would that be fair to say? I'd like to leave my life someplace else. And I want to invite us to consider that in these next couple hours, this is your real life. And the most important question that we can be asking ourselves in the next 2 hours is, what is God doing in me and between me and the person who's sitting next to me in the next 2 hours? The most important question is not, what does Curt have to say? The most important question is, what is the Spirit doing and how is it doing it in the moment? And I want to be awake and alert and attuned to that happening. And so do I want to be awake and alert and attuned to that happening. A word about what I'd like for us to do. We're going to take the next probably 45 minutes, and we're going to talk about what's hard about the world. But we're not going to begin with what's hard. We're going to begin with the way the world was meant to be. We're going to begin with that. And then we're going to talk about what's hard about the world. And in that regard, we're going to talk about trauma and shame and how it works and how it is that we find ourselves where we find ourselves. Something that, you're hearing me say, but like you could say it far better than I could, probably, because you're the ones who find yourselves in your particular story where you are. And then we're going to take about a 5 to 7 minute break, and I'll say it now, it's about a 5 to 7 minute break for you to go pee. Can I say that word? You're going to go pee here. And get your beverages or whatever. We like to say a bio break. That's so sterile. Come on, you're going to go pee. That's what you're going to do. And then, but it's going to be like 7 minutes, so you're going to have to pee quickly. And then we're going to come back, and if you're not here because there's a line in the bathroom, I'm sorry. We're just going to go. We're just not go. We're just going to keep going. And when we come back, we're going to talk about what I want us to consider to be a really hopeful life for folks who have been run over by a truck. And so, with that in mind, let's start with this. Let's begin at the beginning. And when I say the beginning, I mean the first page of the Bible. And in the first page of the Bible, the first thing that we see about what the writers tell us about what we see is that our God is an artist. It's the first thing that you notice about God. You discover what God's doing, but what the artist wants you to know about who God is that God is an artist. He's making stuff. And the stuff that he makes is not just good. The same word in Hebrew for good, and it was good, and it was good, and it was good, is all the same word for beautiful. And then he gets to the end of the first page, and he says, oh my gosh, let's think about this. We're going to, if the text were to be what we would expect it to be, we would expect, and God on the sixth day, and God said, let there be humankind, and there was humankind. But that's not what the text says. The text tells us that God thinks about it. There's a conversation that they have. And you wonder what it would have been like to have been in that hall of the gods, that hall of the Trinity, where they're having the conversation about what it's like. And you can imagine Jesus also wondering if this is a good idea or not. If I'm Jesus, I'm thinking I'm looking at Good Friday and thinking this is not a very good idea. And then they decide anyway, we're going to do this anyway. We're going to do this. And this is the thing. They saw Good Friday coming. And they said, let's do this. Let's do this. It's not unlike being a pastor. If they would have told you that your Good Friday was coming, you might not have said, let's do this. But you did. And out of this, God only sees that this is beauty coming, one thing after another. Moreover, we notice that when God is making things and naming them to be good, the very act of doing this is an act of longing. Let us make mankind. Let us do this. We serve and have been made as beings of great longing, great desire. We come into the world as longing beings. Newborns have appetites that are physical. They want to be fed, nurtured, all the things. And the things that we long for more than anything, we would like to say in our world of interpersonal neurobiology, we can talk about those in 4 words. We talk about the notion that we long to be seen, soothed, safe, and secure. We want to be seen. Here's a question. Who sees you? By whom are you seen? Can you give me the names of who they are? And I don't mean who sees you. I mean, just by whom are you seen? By whom do you have the sense, oh my gosh, I see you seeing me. I feel seen. When I look at your eye, I feel me in your face. This starts when a newborn comes into the world, because if the newborn isn't first seen, we just put her on the table and then she dies. She literally has to be seen in order for us then to soothe her. We're going to clean her up before we give her to mom to nurse her. We have to see her and then we soothe her. And children have all kinds of ways in which they need to be soothed. This also doesn't stop. What are the parts of you that long to be soothed? We're going to go to our grave needing to be soothed. And if we don't know what those things are for which we need soothing, and we don't name them, then we're going to burn a ton of energy just containing it, and that will be energy that is not available for us to create the beauty and goodness that we were made to create, just like our Creator made us to make. But after we are seen and soothed enough, this is early childhood development that never stops. After we are seen and soothed, we have the sense of becoming comfortable and confident in our skin. And the third word that we use is I become safe. Now, safe, this is a word that Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson first coined, and I want to suggest that I use this word differently than they do. And the reason I do is because the word safe has become, in many respects, fairly misappropriated in our culture. We now often use the word safe as a way for me to not have to do hard things. I don't feel safe because, like, you looked at me in a strange way, so I'm not going to do that. You can tell me that you're afraid, but that's saying something very different than telling me that you're not safe. Because, like, you might not feel safe, but you're still quite safe. That's different than feeling afraid or feeling anxious and so forth and so on. But we really want to know that it is true that we do need to protect children when they are newborns from things that are outside their skin. Because we do this all the time. We protect newborns and toddlers and children. We protect them from things outside. And this is still true for us. We have to protect ourselves from, like, the weather. Like, we are the only animals that need clothes. Most of the time, we wear clothes. We don't wear them in the shower, right? If you're wearing your clothes in the shower, we should talk. But we are the only creatures that need clothes, but we need clothes to protect ourselves. There are some people who put clothes on other animals, like on dogs, for instance. Like, that's just weird. The dog didn't ask for clothes. I'm not going to ask if there's anyone here who puts clothes on their dog, because we're going to get to shame in just a minute. But we have to be protected from things outside of our skin. If I'm a 2-year-old, I have to be protected from all kinds of things that I might want to do that I can't control for. But as the 2-year-old, I also need to be protected from myself. I have impulses. I have all kinds of things that I will want to do on my own, that if you don't say no to that, I will create all kinds of problems for myself. And that is also a way that I need to be creating safety even until I am dead. Because as an adult, I will have all kinds of things that I will want to do that are not going to be good for me or anybody else. Seen, soothed, safe. And with this sense of safety, with these three things, I then go on to security. And by security, we mean this, that feeling, sensing in my very chest, in my body, sensing my being seen, soothed, and safe, I now venture out to take the risks that I need to take to create beauty and goodness in the world in a way that often will get my nose bloodied and my knees scraped. I'm going to take risks that may be proper, but they get my feelings hurt. Any pastor here ever been hurt by somebody else? By people who claim they love you? By your elder board? By your congregants? No good deed goes unpunished. And so we will necessarily take risks because we are secure to go out and create and become the outposts of beauty and goodness that God is calling us to be in a world of utter darkness. And we will be wounded as a result. And when we are, we have a place to return where we will be seen, soothed, and safe. And this is what it means for us to continue to grow and become resilient. But we need a place where we can return to become seen, soothed, and safe so that we can once again return to this space of being secure. Look, if Adam and Eve had never eaten the pear, if they'd never done this, at some point, Cain and Abel would have been climbing in the tree, and one of them would have thought to push his brother out of the branch. They would have just, like, they don't have to be sinners. This is what 3-year-olds do. They just do these kinds of things. There would be painful things that would happen. And when they do, would we be able to repair the rupture that takes place when it happens? All this is part of normal, cyclical human growth. And they then go on to create beauty and goodness in the world. And it takes a long time for us to do that. This is all part of what's good. This is all part of how we are made to operate like our Maker. And if we're going to do this really, really well, we do it in the way that they were prepared to do it at the end of Genesis chapter 2. And the man and his wife were naked and unashamed. For us to create durably and powerfully outposts of beauty and goodness in the world, in our churches, for us to do this durably, 3 things are required. The first thing is differentiation and linkage. Now, in the world of interpersonal neurobiology, fancy schmancy term for the work that I do, like this question of those areas of science that all have a stake in the question of what is the mind and what does a healthy mind look like when it's functioning as such. That world likes to talk about this notion of integration, this notion that a world that is functioning well is a world that, not unlike an orchestra, has differentiated parts. Each orchestra has a different section. Each of your churches has a different section. You have relationships with different people that are different. We have different sections. We have a brass section and a woodwind section, the strings and percussion and so forth and so on. And each of them has to know how to play their parts well, just like we hear in St. Paul in 1 Corinthians 12. This whole notion of the body of Jesus, this differentiated system. But each of those differentiated parts need to be able to talk to one another. There has to be linkage. The brass needs to be able to listen to the strings. And in order for this to happen in human beings, in order for this differentiation to come together with linkage, for integration to take place, we need a prefrontal cortex in our brain. That's the place, that's the anatomy, that's the place in the human mind where this integration takes place. It's where all those different things that I sense and I image and I feel and I think and I behave with my body, all those different sections of my mind's orchestra come together. But they need a conductor, and that conductor, my middle prefrontal cortex, it has to go to conductor school in order for it to do its job well. And a conductor school means that in order for my brain to do what it will eventually want to do to create beauty and goodness in the world, needs first to have another outside relationship that is training it to do what it needs to do. We like to say that every newborn comes into the world looking for someone, looking for her, looking for someone, looking for him. Right? They want to be seen. I'm coming in looking for you, looking for me. But when I do come into the world, and by the way, is there anybody here who's actually given birth to a baby? Okay, all right. Was that an easy thing? No, but I got to tell you something. Can you imagine what it was like for the baby that came through? Like, here's the thing. Like, we've never had interviews with a newborn, right? The newborn, they're just not they're not ready to have the conversation yet. It's been too traumatizing for them. They're like, because if you were to talk to them, they would say like, no, never again. No, I'm not doing that. We come into the world in this way of longing to be seen. But when I'm seen by you, I only have about 15 to 20% of my neurons ready to go to do what I need to do. Of those 100 billion neurons that come into the world with me in my brain, about 80 to 85% of them, in order for them to eventually come online and do what they need to do, they need an interaction with an outside human brain. No pressure for parents. So that's a lot of work that my brain has to do that depends on somebody else to help me learn how to do what I'm going to do to become a professional human being. This is all part of this is the first 2 pages of the book of the Bible. It's all the first 2 pages. So we're differentiated and we're linked in order to come together as integrated whole beings that we come together to become because we're interacting with other people, right? Part of that differentiation includes the differences that I have to do, that differentiate me from other people eventually. So we have males and females. I said earlier in a talk that I gave a couple of days ago, like, well, I've been married for 36 years to Phyllis, and I don't deserve my life. I don't deserve my marriage. I am wild about this person. But when we first got married, as I said, like maybe within a few hours, or days or weeks, like I realized like, oh, I thought I wanted to marry Phyllis. I actually really wanted to marry me. I just wanted me to look like her. That's really what I wanted. I wanted someone who thought like I thought, who laughed at what I laughed at, who thought like, no, there is a particular time that you arrive at the movies before it starts, and it's the time that I like who else, like what other time would you want to arrive? In order for children to be born, in order for beauty to emerge, we actually have to co-create with those who are different than us. I actually just want people to be the same. I don't want there to be any arguments. I don't want it to work that hard. But the reality is, when it comes to creating beauty, God has arranged it such that we are to do so with people with whom we have great difference, even our enemies. It's between me and my African American friends, me and my Asian American, me and my Hispanic friends. It's between me and women. Like, it is this differentiation. How many of us are sitting in places where the reality of differentiation has been reason for pain and woundedness? So we need differentiation and linkage. We need integration, but we also need nakedness. The Hebrew for naked, they were naked and unashamed, is also a word for vulnerability. My being naked means that I actually need your protection. I actually need your help. I need what you have because I don't have it. This is how systems become more complex and beautiful. We bring other things into the system. We'd like to think that we have congregations where we have multiple people with different gifts, and they all come in together and they all behave well. I'm going to be naked, and I'm also going to be in that space without shame. The Hebrews had lots of words that they could have used. The Psalms are full of all kinds of words that express emotion. The Hebrews could have said they were naked and happy. I'm sure they were. They were naked and unafraid. They were naked and confident. They were all kinds of words. But the writers know of what they speak because the utilization of shame as a weapon of trauma is coming. And so here stands our first couple on the verge of great creativity, of great generativity, creating an outpost of beauty. Right, Eden, the Garden of Eden is in itself is an outpost in the world that God has created. There was wilderness all around the garden, but there is this outpost and these stewards, and this is what our churches are, right? We long for our churches to be outposts in a world that feels like it's a vast wilderness. In fact, we might say that those things are even reflections of our own souls. That there are parts of our souls that feel much like a garden. There are parts of our souls that feel much like a vast wilderness. Parts that we don't know that even exist. Because we move from the end of the second page of the Bible to the beginning of the third page of the Bible, and this is where things go terribly wrong. And you all know the story. But I'm just going to point out a couple of highlights. The first thing I want to invite you to consider is that evil has an intention, and its intention is to devour us. It's not playing nice. It's the second smartest force on the planet. It's smarter than any of us in the room. It knows the game well. It's far better at it than we are. And what we learn in the course of the arc of the scriptures is not that we need to be afraid of it, but we need to be vigilant. Because it is something that is coming to devour us. Evil does its best work in the middle of good work being done. It is parasitic. It doesn't do bad things on its own. It waits for good things to start, and then it joins the parade. This is the only way that it operates. Every single one of your congregations is an act of war against evil, and it is coming for it. Now, it's smart, so it's not going to knock on your door like someone at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and say, hey, let's go rob a bank. No, it's going to wait till you start a new mission. It's going to wait till you start a new initiative. It's going to wait till you decide we're going to be serious about spiritual formation, and then it is going to throw everything it has at you, but very subtly. And the most potent thing it will use in its effort to devour you and your work is your own story. This is what evil does in Genesis 3. It comes for the woman. Notice that he's just going to have a conversation with the woman in the presence of the man, but somehow the conversation really only takes place between two people. And one of the things that we see that trauma does is that it isolates us. It isolates our brain. Remember, in order for my brain to flourish, we like to say that the brain can do a lot of hard things for a really long period of time as long as it doesn't have to do it by itself. Why it is that we become exhausted, why it is that we become overrun, why it is that we become all the things that we become that end up having people in my office is primarily, first and foremost, a function of our being completely and utterly in isolation. And to the degree that I am isolated from you is also a function of how there will be different parts of my own story that will be cut off from other parts of my own story. I have a friend who's been a patient of mine for some time who, when he first saw me, we did the standard psychiatric evaluation because this guy, though he was like wildly successful in his life, was starting to have panic attacks that he couldn't explain. And if you were to look at his life, you'd think on the surface that there would be nothing for him to be anxious about. And we asked the question, tell me what it was like growing up in your house. And he said, I grew up in a loving Christian home, which is code for life sucked, but I just couldn't say it, right? It's code for that. And the next question that I offer to him is, who was in charge of discipline in your house? And he said it was my mother, because anytime my father got involved, who was a deacon at the church, brutality was soon to follow. Now, how is it that a person who has lived in that house tells a story in which he grew up in a loving Christian home? I will tell you, it's not because he's lying. It's because this is the story that he has to tell himself in order to protect himself from the brutality. And we all do this. We all have parts of our lives that have been traumatized, that have been wounded, and we have to survive. And so we find coping skills that include ways in which we tell our story that are not completely true to the facts. But we still have to find a way to survive, and we do so on our own. And that stuff lays buried until other things in life eventually overwhelm it, and we can't live with it any longer in the way that we have been managing it. And that's when we start to have symptoms. And people come into my office and they say, there's something wrong with me because I'm depressed or anxious, and all the things that we're on a list that we would typically want to pathologize. And I would say, actually, as it turns out, it's important for you to know that apart from things like head trauma, infection, seizures, tumors, the brain, as it turns out, is an exceptionally reliable organ. And when you're depressed, it's because your brain is doing exactly what it should be doing under your circumstances. When you're anxious, your brain is doing exactly what it should be doing. When I have that smoke detector that goes off in my kitchen when I'm cooking bacon, I mean, Jiminy Christmas. Like, why can't a guy just cook bacon? Nothing's on fire. I don't like the smoke detector sound. But it's not because it's a problem. It's doing its job. And when we are overrun, our minds are doing their jobs. The problem is it's trying to send a signal calling for help. Because from the beginning, I can't create or recover from trauma on my own. And so there is a wounding that takes place. We don't have time to go into all the details of the conversation between the woman and the snake. There is a wounding that takes place, and I invite you to consider that shame actually starts to make its way into the conversation long before any fruit gets eaten. It essentially goes something like this. You think that your God loves you, but I got news for you. You're not nearly as important to your God as you think that you are. Because otherwise, why wouldn't he just let you have what you want to have? Look at it. Why does he not want you to become like him? Oh, because maybe you're not nearly what you think you are to begin with. The writers are brilliant. The message is subtle. And this is the same thing that evil does with us. Shame then becomes the weapon of choice. People sometimes ask me, well, is shame always bad? And I was like, absolutely not. Like, it's built into the creative order. Like, it shows up. It's part of God's plan to signal to us that there's a problem. It is true. There are behaviors that we conduct as humans for which shame is absolutely the proper response. We're not here to say that shame in and of itself is bad. What we're here to say is that evil wants to make sure that when we sense the signal, that our response to it is to move away from each other, away from ourselves, and for God's sake, away from God. Farther and farther away. Like in The Great Divorce, the opening chapter, where C.S. Lewis paints hell as a place where people just build their houses farther and farther and farther away from each other. I have those parts of me for which I feel this shame that I just want to bury, keep it as far away from me as I can. The problem with this, of course, is that this is not what my mind wants to be doing, because remember, we are a people of great longing. In Ecclesiastes, we read that God has placed eternity in our hearts. And for the Hebrew, eternity is not just a measurement of time. It is a description of the quality of God's life. To live in the context of eternity is to live like God lives. And God lives with an eternal longing for us. How many of us here, I'm thinking of a person that I work with who has parents that are in their 90s. Anybody here have parents who are aging? Yeah, and I do as well. And how many of you can think that, like, oh, I have parents who are aging and they still drive me crazy? Right, they still drive me crazy. And sometimes they continue to, like, literally behave badly because they, as parents, have not taken care of their own demons. But I just kind of like, well, they're in their 80s, so there's nothing we can do, so I'm just going to let them off the hook. That's horse hooey. Moses was 120, and he went to his grave with an anger problem. God continued to try to work with Moses for a long time. Just because he was old didn't mean he didn't need to do the work. But we have ancient parts of our lives that are still active because we have parents who still misbehave. And every time they do, I'm reminded of the part of me that I've been trying to bury since I was 6. And that part gets activated now when I have to interact with Mr. Johnson, who's on my elder board. Because gosh, does he feel like my dad? You with me? This is how evil wants to wield shame. Now, there are some things that are important to notice about the mechanics of shame that are helpful for us to pay attention to. Here's the first thing. Alan Shore is a neuropsychologist at UCLA, and he likes to talk about shame being a neurophysiologic event. And this is really important for us to know that when you look at the literature, we often think about shame, and the minute that we do think about it, we think about it as this abstract thing, like this thing that I feel, all of which is true. But it is first and foremost, it's important shame is first and foremost not something that is about a thing that happened to me or about something that somebody said to me. My experience of shame is first and foremost a neurophysiologic event. I first sense it in my body. I don't first think about it in my cognition. I first sense it literally in my body, all of my body. And Shore likes to talk about it as if it were a standard transmission automobile. Anybody here drive a stick shift? A few of you. Yeah, I gave a talk on this like several years ago in Manhattan. My wife was there and she said, Curt, why are you talking about stick shifts? These people don't even know what cars are. Like, let alone, how to drive a standard transmission. Okay, so for the 10 of you who know what this is. All right. So with standard transmission, you have an accelerator and you have a brake and you have a clutch. And what happens when the car decelerates, either because you apply the brake or you just take your foot off the gas? What happens when you decelerate if you don't apply the clutch? It kills the car, right? Literally, it doesn't just kill it softly either, does it? No. It kills it violently. And I'm having visions of my older brother, who's teaching me how to drive a stick shift in the center of the square where the light turns from red to green 4 times in the cycle, and I can't get the car out of first gear. You talk about shame. This is, I was living, breathing experience, with trying to learn how to drive a stick shift. In the human brain, the accelerator is what we call the sympathetic drive system. Now, you all have heard of the fight or flight system, and the sympathetic drive system is part of that, but that's not the only thing that it does. Part of what it does is that it is part of what it activates what we call our go mode. Babies come into the world with this. They're just going, and then they fall asleep. And then they go, and they fall asleep. And this is what happens, right? We're just in go mode. You with me? And that go mode isn't just my physicality. It's my thinking. It's my interest. It's my longing. It's my movement toward the thing that I want. It's my movement toward the bright object. If I'm a 2-year-old, it's my movement toward the woman or the man who's of an interest to me. It's my movement toward a new job. It's my movement toward a new ministry. It's my movement toward this calling. It's in go mode. But we know that we also have to learn restraint. We have to have a brake applied, and that's the parasympathetic system. So we have an accelerator, the parasympathetic system, and children don't have this at their disposal naturally. They have to have it activated by their parents. And so parents will say no to them. They will redirect them. They will do whatever they can to apply the brake in a way that is meaningful. Sometimes you apply the brake gradually. You see the light change from several hundred yards away. You take your foot off the accelerator. You apply the brake easily. Fine. You apply the clutch. It's all good. Sometimes you have to apply it quickly. Something runs out into the street. You have to slam on the brakes. If you're applying the clutch, we have to wonder, we know that we've got this sympathetic drive system. We know that we've got this parasympathetic drive system, the accelerator and the brake. What's the clutch? The clutch is the intervening interpersonal relationship that the parent offers to the child as the parent applies the brake. So even when you're in the conversation, you're at a cocktail party. You've been in this conversation at a cocktail party, and do you go to cocktail parties? I'm in a church. I don't know if we do those things here. Okay. I'm an evangelical Quaker. Came from an evangelical Quaker background. Cocktail parties was there's a C-O-C-K, it's like a 4-letter word, but it was 8 letters. You're standing at a party, and someone's having a conversation with you, and you suddenly discover that you've made a comment, and they just keep going. How's that feel? You like that feeling? Of just being ignored? No. Nobody's trying to shame, but that's exactly what we feel. We feel ignored. There has been a brake applied and there's no clutch. You with me? The 10-year-old who comes to his dad and says, here's my 92% on my math. I've never gotten a score this high. And dad says, where's the other 8%? It can be horrendously traumatic. For the females in this room, these statistics are changing by the year. For the females in this room, you have anywhere between a 1 in 3 and 1 in 4 chance of having been sexually mistreated somewhere in your life. Men, look around. Do the math. Those things are horrible. There may have been significant events, even in the last 2 years, for you as pastors that have been traumatizing and where shame has been the weapon that has been most effectively wielded. Because in your longing to do the next beautiful good thing, somebody came along and slammed on the brake and there was no clutch applied. And in order for you to survive, you do what we all do. we bury what we feel because it's just not tolerable. I find myself becoming isolated. This is the next thing that happens. Once the brake is applied and no clutch is involved, we find that shame then becomes quite disintegrating. The different parts, all the parts of the orchestra, they stop talking to each other. It also makes me very unable to create. We become static. I can't move. It's difficult to be creative when shame is flooding my brain. And it doesn't even have to be something that's overwhelming to me all the time. It's just this small thing, just along the base of my consciousness, but that I have to burn energy all the time to contain. And it shows up in the context of our stories, right? Our 10-year-old who brought that 92% to his dad, the next test that he brings is going to be 93%, and already what he's discovered is that shame in his brain, the networks, the neural networks, the neurons that represent shame are now tangled up with the networks that represent joy. If I'm going to present something to you that is joyful, I know what's going to come from that, and so I'm just going to choose not to show you, not to tell you about the things that I really have done well. And then somebody's going to pay me a compliment, and I'm going to no, I'm not going to receive that. I learned pretty quickly not to receive your bids for intimacy, because your bids for intimacy get too close to the neural networks that represent my shame, that are all tangled up with human relationships. The longing that I have for my dad to say, oh my gosh, this is just, oh my God, this is wonderful. The longing that I have for that runs headlong into a Jersey barrier wall when shame hits me in the process. And we have hundreds of moments like this every day. Literally, shame is a neurophysiologic disintegrating effect. It leads us to hide. It leads us to isolation. It leads us to condemnation. Most of the shame that we experience at our own hand. Are you aware of that? By far, most of how you experience shame is not the things that have happened to you, but the things that you then tell yourself in response to the things that have happened to you. And most of that happens in the privacy of your own mind. Dozens of times I should have done this, I should have done that, over and over and over and over and over again. One of the things that we also need to be aware of is that, emotion, my colleague, Courtney Morrison, likes to talk about emotion being contagious. And it is. So, for instance, one of the things that you'll notice, we can't do an experiment here without sending all but one of you out of the room, but let's just imagine for a moment, if there were only one of you who were in the room with me up here speaking, first of all, that would be very strange. Why? Because otherwise we would just go out and have coffee and sit down. So we wouldn't do that. But if there were only one of you here, you can imagine that everything about the tenor and tone of our experience in this room would be different. Right? Because the very presence of other people's bodies attuning to the thing that you're attuning to is affecting your own attunement to the very same thing. You feel people feeling things who are sitting beside you. They don't have to tell you. You sense it in the room. And this is exactly what shame does. Shame itself becomes contagious. This is why we have gang effect. This is why we have large hordes. When groups start to become shame-based, the whole is larger than some of its parts. It's not much of a jump from the end of Genesis 2, where creativity was on the verge of great generativity. It's not much of a jump to get from there to John 9. And in John 9, as you're all probably familiar with this, right? It opens with Jesus, after he's just had this discourse with those who got questions about who he is. He's walking along, and as they do, he and the disciples come upon a man born blind. And look, the dude doesn't even have a name. Look, Bartimaeus got a name. This cat doesn't even have a name. He's just a blind dude. Minding his own business. They come along, and what's the first thing that the disciples ask? What do they say? Who sinned? Wow. You would think, here's the blind guy. Jesus, oh my gosh. get your cell phone out. Like, we're going to take, this is, heal the guy. This is, super Instagram material. Right? This is going to be great. Like, this will be fabulous for him. No, the first act is one of condemnation. They are already primed. They're not curious about creating beauty and goodness in the world. They are assuming that this guy is cursed, and it's either him or his parents for the reason for it. You see, one of the things that trauma does to us is that trauma doesn't just simply make us feel bad. It doesn't just simply shatter me. It shatters my capacity for even knowing what it is that's happened to me. It also shatters my capacity to imagine any way in which my life could be different than what it is. Are you with me? It makes it difficult for me to imagine the things that are beautiful and good, because to do that, remember, requires intimate connection with people who are different from me, the same people who have got me into this place in the first place. I'm not stupid, which is why we have so many pastors who are just leaving the ministry in droves. You're not stupid. You're wounded. You've been run over by a truck. And what does Jesus do? He says, boys, that's a wrong question. That's actually what the Aramaic reads, if you go through that. It's a wrong question. As long as I'm in the world, I'm the light of the world. And we're going to do the Father's work as long as I'm here. That's what we're here. We're here like this man, nor his parents sinned such that he was born blind. Check this out. This man was born blind such that the works of God might be revealed in him. How many of us have those parts of our lives that have been so traumatized, so buried, that you can't imagine for the life of you that becomes the very wellspring of the works of God? And I don't just mean what's happened in the last 2.5 years. I mean what's happened for many of you for the last 5 decades. What happened to you when you were 10? What happened to you when you were 17? What continues to happen to you in your marriage? What continues to happen to you in your church? It's hard to imagine that those are the places where the works of God are waiting to emerge. The next thing you know, Jesus does Genesis 2 all over again, right? And God formed the man from the mud of the earth. Jesus spits on the ground. I'm not quite sure what it is, with the Middle Eastern thing with spitting and making mud. Why don't you just be healed thing? I don't really, but if you're the blind guy, you're just minding your own business and slap, slap. I got mud on my face. I'm not I don't know what's happening here. And then he says, now go, I didn't ask for this. Now go wash in the pool of Siloam. Okay, I'm not really quite sure where that is because I can't see, but thanks. So just going to send me to go find the time. I'm going to go find it. And then I wash and I come back and I can see. And then what you find is you would think oh my gosh, the neighbors see this cat. And they're like, George, you're healed. No. Healing is a disruptive technology. Your healing will be disruptive. We like to think that healing is going to be a wonderful thing. What about the woman in John 8? We know that passage was added probably a couple hundred years later, but what about it, right? He says, neither do I condemn thee. Go and sin no more. How's she going to feed her kids? Healing is disruptive, which is partly why it is that we're so afraid to enter into it. Because this guy is healed by Jesus, and next thing you know, all hell breaks loose. Because Jesus knows that what's happening here and the blindness that is mostly contained therein is not about this man. It is about the community in which he lives. This is what it looks like when shame is writ large socially. It is an entire community that has been blind to him. And very quickly, the conversation moves from what is this about the blind guy to what is this about Jesus? And so we see that evil's intention is to use what it does to each of us individually with our shame as a way to extend that to devour us as entire communities, which is what John 9 is about. But I want us to know that this is where the news begins to change. As we like to say, the news about shame is far worse than you know, and far better than you can imagine. Because what comes next is that when Jesus heard that they had put him out, he came to find him. And this is where I want us to pause. I'm going to give us 7 minutes to pee. And then we're going to come back and go from where we've left off. 7 minutes. The clock is ticking.